Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nan Peterson with the Charlotte Development Center. I'm in the planning department, and we want to welcome you to our 8th session of our UDO University. Today, we're going to be concentrating on the UDO in relationship to parking, landscape, screening, and open space. Again, I know I'll be repeating this for many of you that have joined us for every session, but we do have some new folks here. So just want to go over quickly the meeting procedures. The Charlotte Development Center staff will be narrating these presentations. Today's presenter is with our planning team, Mr. Solomon Fortune with commercial zoning. Please enter any questions or comments in the chat. We're going to be answering these questions at the end of the presentation. Also, at the end of the presentation, if there's time, we'll answer any additional questions through chat. And to be fair and equitable to all, staff will not unmute participants to ask a question or make a comment. We will again spend time at the end of the presentation to address questions and comments that have not yet been answered. Our mission statement or purpose for the UDO University is to acquaint attendees with the City of Charlotte's requirements and processes affiliated with the currently adopted Unified Development Ordinance, the UDO. Comments made at the UDO University sessions are intended to provide guidance and are non-binding on the formal review of the development plans. We've had 10, we're going to have 10 sessions for the UDO University. Again, we are at session 8. Registration is required for each session, as you know, to register online at charlotteudo.org. Sessions are on Fridays from 1 to 2:30. All sessions are virtual via Zoom and are recorded and posted on the UDO website. They are being facilitated by various agencies in the Charlotte Development Center, and each session will build upon information provided in previous sessions. Reminder, all sessions are recorded and can be found at the UDO website under the UDO University tab. Today, we are on parking, landscaping, screening, and open space. Next week, we're going to be required new street improvements and standards. And our final session on the 17th will be on residential permitting. Our meeting purpose for today is to understand where to find the UDO requirements for parking, landscape, screening, and open space. We want to learn about the various topics covered by each respective article and review at a high level some of the specific requirements for each sessions. And just a general note, some of the tables shown on the various slides may have been updated in the UDO since the slides were created. We ask for all of this, please refer to the adopted UDO online to make sure you are looking at the right tables. The slides are for illustrative purposes only. I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Solomon to begin our presentation.
Hello, everybody. I am Solomon Fortune, the commercial zoning supervisor for the City of Charlotte Land Development Center. Just so obviously we're talking, as Nan mentioned, the parking and where you can find the parking UDO. The requirements are found in Article 19, and it's called off-street vehicle and bicycle parking. When we had our proposed UDO districts, we had broken them up into, obviously this is kind of a refresh in our neighborhood zoning districts, as you can see here. Then we had our employment zoning districts, and then we had our centers zoning districts, and then kind of our special purpose districts. When we updated the UDO and our parking, we made changes. We went to a 3-tier approach to parking requirements. In tier 1, there's minimum off-street parking requirements and no maximum parking limits for the districts you see here: ML1, ML2, IC1, Office, MHP, N1, all the districts, and N2A. In tier 2, we have both minimum and maximum off-street parking requirements for the IMU, IC2, RC, CG, CR, NC, CA1, N2B, and N2C. In tier 3, there are no parking minimums except for a limited number of uses, including residential in certain locations. Maximum parking limits apply. That's in our TOD, UC, CAC2, RAC, and UE. The tier 3 minimums for residential uses may be reduced or eliminated with local city parking permit program or a parking studies strategy plan to reduce parking demand approved by the planning director. The 3-tiered approach to parking requirements. Again, it's in tier 1. there are no, there are minimum off-street parking requirements, no maximum parking. Again, in the ML1, ML2, and you can see up there, we're saying for single family, it's 2 spaces per unit. Manufactured homes, 1 space per unit. Other residential uses, 1.5 spaces per unit. In the non-residential, we use the typical standard of 1 space for 500 square feet gross. Some uses have different parking standards based on the unique characteristics. Car washes and correctional facilities are examples. In tier 2, it includes both minimum and maximum for off-street parking requirements. The maximum does not apply to parking structures. And you can see the districts that are listed up here that it applies to. For residential, we went to minimum 1 space per unit, and then there was a maximum of 2 space per unit. For non-residential, the minimum was 1 space per 750 square feet gross. And then the typical maximum was 1 space per 250 square feet gross. Again, with the caveat, some uses have different parking standards based on their unique characteristics. In tier 3, this was the approach was based on our TOD districts. It focused on maximum off-street parking requirements. So again, it's for our TOD, most of our urban districts, as you can see up there. The minimum applies to multifamily residential, live performance venues, micro production of alcohol, excluding brewing facilities, nightclubs, restaurants, and bars within 200 feet of an N1 zoning district. It's 1 space per 500 square feet for gross, plus 50% of outdoor seating / activity area. Residential is 1 space per dwelling unit. The maximum residential is typically 1 to 2 spaces per unit, depending upon building type. And then non-residential, the typically ranges from 1 space per 200 square feet to 1 space per 300 square feet. Other vehicle parking standards. The calculation of vehicle parking spaces. Parking spaces are calculated based on the use. For mixed use, the number of spaces is the sum of the requirements for each use. And kind of think of that, putting it in general terms, if you have a strip center, if you have a medical office, restaurant, and then retail, we're basing it, parking it based on the square footage of that area being leased. Minimum off-street parking space requirement, it's for construction of a new principal building. An existing principal building is expanded, resulting in the requirement of 10 additional spaces. A change of use, an expansion of an existing use, resulting in the requirement of more than 10 additional spaces. And kind of think of it as where you're going, kind of like if you're thinking like in today's world, put in general terms, if you were going from if you had a requirement that said I had 1 space, but now I'm going to use that required 20, then that difference is 19, then that's when the additional spaces and those requirements would be triggered. Spaces exempt from parking maximums would be required ADA spaces, American Disabilities Act, EV installed spaces, pickup, drop-off spaces such as ride-hailing services, vehicles, delivery driver vehicles, spaces for exchange of goods. On-street parking spaces abutting the site, and then visitor spaces for townhomes and multifamily up to 10 spaces or 10% of the total number of units, whichever is greater. And then we've also in the ordinance, we have put in some requirements for electrical vehicle charging stations. There are 2 types. There are 2 types of EV charging stations that may be required. EV capable, which is the installation of the electrical panel capacity with a dedicated branch circuit and continuous raceway from the panel to the future EV parking spaces. And then the EV SE installed, think of it kind of like that's the actual charging station where I can actually charge my electric vehicle. For electrical vehicles charging stations, you will find the requirements in table 19-2. And when you're looking at here, it's telling you as part of the total number of spaces for off-street, it's telling you, EV, it's breaking it down into EV capable spaces and then the actual EV installed. And then it is giving you the percentage. So like 10 to 25 spaces, 25, it would be 20% required to be EV. And then you would have to round up depending upon that number, that calculation. Uses that are requiring EV charging station requirements, there are typically, those are multifamily stacked dwellings, residential component of mixed use developments, hotel, parking lots, and parking structures as a principal use. And again, it's saying EV, SE installed spaces do not count towards parking maximums. Where parking minimums required, EV installed spaces do count as 2 spaces when they are provided on. Also, as part of this in the parking standards, there is a location and access. The location of and access to surface parking areas differs by zoning districts. These standards are found in Article 19.6 and Table 19-4. And when you look, when you see this chart here, it's telling you where you can have it, and where the check mark is, that's where you have it. If the box is grayed out, that means you cannot have that for that district. There's also some requirements for the design of parking structures. Parking structures must meet standards for screening of vehicles, the vehicle clears sight zone, treatment resembling architecture of the occupied building along the street and other frontages, architectural elements to create a pedestrian scale entrance, options which would include awnings, overhangs, decorative screens. So in the UDO, in this article, there is the design of parking structures, and we have several options. There's option A, which would be wrapped with ground floor activation. Option V, which has ground floor activation and a step back. Option C, ground floor activation with screening, and then option D, setback with landscape area. When you look at these tables 19-5, it indicates which design options are available by frontage type and zoning district. And when you look up there, like if you look at Main Street, and then when it gives you N2C, it's saying you have, if you're going to do a parking structure, you have options A and B. In CG, you would have A, B, and C, and CR, A, B, C, and so on. And then when you look at some of those other districts where you're getting, when you started getting to the secondary and some of those other streets, you would be getting more options to how you're going to design the parking structure along that frontage. Bicycle parking, required bicycle parking. When it is required is new construction of a principal building. When an existing principal building is expanded, resulting in the requirement of more than 5 additional bike parking spaces, a change of use or an expansion of an existing use, resulting in the requirement of more than 5 additional bicycle spaces. There is short-term and long-term spaces. The number of long-term spaces, if any, is the percentage of required total bicycle spaces. All other bicycle spaces shall be designed as short-term spaces. And basically the difference of short-term, which I think is coming up in another slide, short-term would be basically, you'll see them out there, they're the standard U racks. Back in the old days, it was a wave rack, and those are basically uncovered, they're outside the door. Long-term spaces are typically covered, and there is a requirement that you have to protect the rider when he's parking the bike from the elements in the weather. The minimum and maximum where bicycle parking is required, a minimum of 2 short-term spaces, bicycle spaces shall be provided. No more than 30 short-term spaces are required to be provided. For non-residential uses, no more than 50 long-term bicycles parking spaces are to be required. Bicycle parking standards, typically you will find the standards that we're using currently, which is in our Charlotte Land Development Standards Manual. The short term is typically here on the example, you'll see you call it a post and ring rack, where someone can be able to lock their bike in 2 places. The long term in the middle, that's typically a long term one you'll see, which is kind of called a bicycle locker. And then the one on the far right there, that's kind of an innovative design that zoning and Charlotte Department of Transportation typically have to look at and approve if someone's approving those. Going down to the standards, bike lockers and racks shall be located on a hard surface and be securely anchored. All bicycle racks and bicycle parking spaces shall be designed to meet the standards and design specifications of the Charlotte Land Development Standards Manual. Alternative designs may be deemed acceptable, obviously by review and approval through Charlotte Department of Transportation and the commercial zoning team. Short-term bicycle parking may be located in the right-of-way, subject to approval by the Charlotte Department of Transportation or the North Carolina Department of Transportation, depending upon the road that your site's fronting on. All long-term spaces shall be fully covered from inclement weather. Required bicycle parking. Some residential uses such as single-family, duplex, triplex, and quads and townhomes do not have a minimum bicycle parking requirement. Certain other uses may not have bicycle parking requirements. These are typically auto-oriented uses, such as a car wash, gas station, or industrial uses, such as a salvage yard or recycling center. Table 9-3 contains the bicycle parking requirements according to use. And just if you look at the example, if you look over here where it says dwelling multifamily, you would have 1 space for every 5 dwelling units for your bicycles. And then it says 80% will be required to be long-term spaces. And then when you start looking at commercial use, just going down, it's saying 1 space for every 1,500 square feet of gross floor area. And then 25% of that number will be required to be long-term spaces. Now, moving into the next section, obviously, once you have your parking requirement established, now we have the UDO landscaping and screening requirements for your parking, and then also some of your uses required back in the current ordinance, we call it buffers. And then now today we're calling them landscape yards. That's in Article 21. And just to let you know that 21 zoning is basically handling everything from 21.1 all the way to 21.12. After that, that falls under the Chief Urban Forester's administration and his team for review. The purpose of landscape and screening standards is to preserve and enhance the appearance and character of the city, and increase the compatibility of adjacent uses, and minimize the adverse impact of objectionable activities or impacts on neighboring uses, to create transitional areas between uses or districts or of different intensities. The types of landscape screening are: we have parking lot perimeter landscape, parking structural landscaping, landscaping yards, formerly called buffers, screening for loading areas, and solid waste services. The selection, installation, and maintenance: all landscaping shall be installed according to sound horticultural practice and in a manner designed to encourage quick establishment and healthy growth, and consistent with the Charlotte Land Development Standards Manual. When you're looking at this slide, there's the tree planting detail that's from the standards manual that we use. And then also on the right here, you will see the approved planting species that staff reviews when your site is coming in. We typically will look up the common name and the scientific name to see if it is matching. Is it, does it grow to the size that's required? Is it, is it evergreen or deciduous? Sorry. And we look at that to see if when you're planning to meet your buffer in any of those screening standards, landscape yards, that requirements. There is a new provision that we have in the UDO. It is called species diversity. Diversity among required plant material is required for visual interest, and also to reduce the risk of losing a large population of plants due to disease. The species diversity requirement of this section applies as following. A, the species diversity applies to landscape plantings required by this article, and species diversity only applies to the installation of new plantings. And when you're looking at table 21-1, it is telling you the total number of plants. It's saying 100%. You can use 1 species. When you get to 5 to 10, you can use 60% of 1 species. And then you have to have a minimum of 2 different types of species. And following that chart going down, obviously it goes down, but so the percentage goes down, but then the number of different types of species increases. Maintenance. All landscaping shall be free from disease, pests, weeds, and litter. All landscaping elements should be maintained in good repair or replaced periodically as needed to ensure their continued function, structural soundness, and aesthetically pleasing condition. Any landscape element that dies or is seriously damaged shall be removed and replaced within 30 days of the beginning of the subsequent growing season. Any ornamental grasses or shrubs planted next to sidewalks shall be planted and maintained so that they do not encroach into the sidewalks at maturity. Parking lot perimeter landscaping. Surface parking lots are required to be screened at the edge of the parking lot. Where required, parking lots of 10 spaces or more, driveways and maneuvering areas located within the side and rear setbacks. When required, a new principal building is constructed or spaces are added to an existing parking lot where the total existing and new is 10 or more spaces, or reconstruction of 50% more of an existing parking lot. Exceptions: when parking areas are shared between properties, perimeter landscaping not required along a shared lot line. When perimeter landscaping and a landscape yard is also required, the requirements of the landscape yard control. Vehicle dealerships are not required to install along areas of the parking lot used to display vehicles for sale. Not required along the edge of the site abutting another property if the zoning administrator determines it would serve no meaningful purpose. General standards. Landscaping areas shall be at least 5 feet in width and an additional 2 feet between the landscape area and any wheel stops or curbs. Shrubs shall be evergreen and a minimum of 2 feet in height when planted, provided an average height of 3 to 4 feet and a minimum spread of 2 feet is expected as normal growth within 4 years. In here, there's a design options. We have several design options. Option one is 1 shrub for every 5 feet. 60% of the landscape area must be planted with a mix of ground cover, perennials, ornamental grasses, and other native planting types that provide a minimum of 3 feet in height at maturity. The results of all plantings shall be a semi-opaque screen that obscures a minimum of 75% of the view from the ground to a minimum of 3 feet and a maximum height of 4 feet. Option 2. As an alternate option to option 1, a pedestrian wall of 4 feet in height may be installed. Shrubs, ground cover, perennials, ornamental grasses, and other native planting types shall be planted in the area in front of the wall. Up to 30% of the total length of the wall may be designed as a seating wall. Where seating areas are included, the minimum wall height does not apply and plantings are not required in front of the wall. Parking structure, landscape area. When a landscape area is required for a parking structure, it shall be planted as the following: 1 shrub for every 5 feet of perimeter area length. Minimum 1 large or medium maturing tree for every 30 feet of the landscape area. 3 small maturing trees may be substituted for 1 large or medium maturing tree. Trees must be spaced linearly on center or grouped to complement an overall design concept. Remaining area outside of the shrub and tree masses shall be planted in ground cover, turf, perennials, ornamental grasses, and other native type plantings. Landscape yard, also known as was previously called buffers. Certain uses or districts, because of their character or intensity, may create adverse impacts when developed adjacent to other less intensive uses or districts. A landscaping yard provides a transition between these uses and or districts that minimize adverse impacts. A landscape yard is required with new construction of a principal building, an addition to an existing principal building, an additional principal or accessory use that is conducted primarily outdoors is established on the site. A change of use category within the use matrix found in Article 15. And table 21.2, landscaping yard class describes the width and design of each class of landscape yard. So if you look at A, it says width of landscape yard. It's telling you the development size. So if you're up to 3 acres, it's 40 feet. 3+ acres, is 65 feet for an A, and then it's 7 acres to 10, 85 feet. More than 10 acres, 100. If you have a table B there, it would be 25 feet. And then if it's C, it's 10. And then it goes down to, it's telling you the shrubs. It's telling you in zone 1, you have to have evergreen shrubs for 2 linear feet. And then in zone 2, you have 1 evergreen shrub for every 300 square feet. And then if it's B, and so on when you look at this table. Going down, obviously, when you kind of look at, there's a fence and wall. If you're going to use that, it's telling you it's like zone 1, it's optional. In zone 2, a fence or wall is not permitted. The width of zone 2 may be reduced by 25% if a solid fence or wall is provided in zone 1. Again, it's optional, but then for the C, it is a solid fence / wall. And then we also have put a requirement for your fence wall for an A. It's a 6 foot minimum, an 8 foot max. And then for B, you have it's another 6 foot minimum and an 8 foot max. And then for C, you have a 6 foot minimum and then 10 foot max. The Class A landscape yard is divided into Zone 1 and Zone 2 as follows. Zone 1 comprises the first 25 feet of the landscape yard, measured perpendicularly from the rear yard or interior side lot line. Zone 2 comprises the remainder of the required landscape yard outside of Zone 1, Within zone 2, plantings may be grouped to complement an overall design concept. All required trees are to be large maturing or medium maturing trees. Substitution for small maturing trees may be permitted by the table. And if you look at the graphic here, it's showing you it's demonstrating the zone 1 and the 25 feet, and then zone 2 where you can, like, again, you can either plant them in as kind of like the zone 1, or you can group them and have some type of pattern. Required landscape yards by district. The requirement for a landscape yard and the class of the landscape yard, A, B, or C, depends on the zoning district of the development site, the type of development, and what it abuts. Where a use has a prescribed condition that requires a specific class landscape yard, those conditions control over the requirements of the table 21-3. And if you look at the chart here, 21-3, it is telling you it's got the zoning districts, and then it's telling you, if going down on the left, it's saying property under development. So for example, if we go to N2C, and then you go over there, it's saying required to install landscape yard when you're adjacent to non-residential or mixed-use development, townhome, multifamily development use. And then it says landscape yard required when you are abutting a residential use. It is saying you have to have a B. If you're abutting a single family duplex, triplex, or quadruplex dwelling, you have to have a class B. Now, some of the ones where you get more in your class A, you're getting into your more heavy. So if you look at ML1, ML2, when you're abutting another district, except CR, ML1, ML2, I1 CD or I2 CD, it's typically a class A. Abutting a CR zoning district, you have to have a B. And when located and across the street from a neighborhood 1 or neighborhood 2 place type, you have to have a class B. And that's when you look at your zoning district, look across, and that tells you what it is when you're using these tables. Landscape yard location. Required landscape yards shall be located within the side and rear setbacks. In certain circumstances, landscape yards may be specifically required for other setbacks outside of the side or rear setback. And that's typically, you notice, which was called out for some of your industrial when you're across from residential. When parking lot perimeter landscaping is required between abutting properties, and a landscape yard per this section is also required, the requirements of the landscape yard control. And kind of the detail on the right kind of shows the general location of a landscape yard, where it's showing your frontage and where your side and rear setbacks are and where that landscape area is. And then it shows the abutting use. Required screening. Loading areas. All districts except ML1 and ML2. Exterior loading areas shall be screened from all streets, frontages, and along required side and rear setbacks with a minimum 75% opaque wall or fence, a minimum of 6 feet to a maximum of 8 feet in height. ML1 and ML2 districts, exterior loading areas to the side and rear of buildings are not required to be screened. Any loading areas visible from a public or network required street must install parking lot screening. Internal loading areas must be screened with loading doors, and the loading doors must remain closed when not in use. Required screening. Large waste containers, recycling stations, and solid waste areas. Exterior dumpsters, recycling containers, and solid waste handling areas must be fully enclosed on 3 sides by a minimum 75% opaque fence, wall, or wall extension of the principal building. A wall extension must be constructed as an integral part of the building's architectural design. Such fence or wall shall be a minimum of 1 foot above the height of the container to a maximum of 2 feet above the container. The enclosure must be gated. Such gate must be a solid and a minimum of 6 feet and a maximum of 8 feet in height. Dumpsters and recycling containers must remain in the enclosure with the gate closed and or locked. Alternative landscape requirements. The zoning administrator may alter the landscape or screening requirements if one or more of the following conditions would make strict adherence to the requirements serve no meaningful purpose, or would make it physically impossible to install and maintain the required buffer or screen. Unusual topography or elevation, the soil or subsurface condition on the site. The modified landscape yard or screening must comply with the spirit and intent of the landscape requirements, and the existing site features and any alternative buffer materials will screen the proposed use as effectively as the required buffer or screening. Open space. Open space requirements are found in Article 16, as in 16.4 to be precise. It basically gives you the requirements for the design of on-site open space. In addition, open space requirements are included for each individual zoning district in their respective articles. Open space requirements again. When required within the zoning district, open space shall meet the design requirements of the table 16-1, design of open space organized by type of open space, public, common, or private. Driveway, sidewalk, parking areas, required bicycle parking, above ground utility areas, mailboxes, landscape yards, required stream buffers, and tree save areas do not count towards on-site open space requirements. Uses exempt from required on-site open spaces. Uses within the categories of open space, recreation and agricultural uses, infrastructure uses, or transportation uses in the use matrix in Article 15 are not required to provide on-site open space. Open space requirements for your neighborhood zoning districts. New development, change of use, and expansions of buildings by 5,000 square feet or 20% of the building area, whichever is less, is required to provide open space and specified in this section. Such open space may be private open space, common open space, public open space, or any combination of thereof. And when you look down, if you look across, there is the use going down, such as multifamily stacked. And if you go across in N1F, it's required to be 10% of the lot area. In 2A, 10% of the lot area. And 2B, same thing all the way across. Multifamily attached, you would have to have 250 square feet per unit. And then as you went up, going to N2B, it drops down to 150 square feet a unit, and N2C the same way. For non-residential, in any of those districts, it says 10% of the lot area for sites greater than half an acre. And the same way with mixed-use development, it's 10% of the lot area, and again, for sites greater than half an acre. And employment and center zoning districts. Again, new development, change of use, and expansion of buildings by 5,000 square feet or 20% of the building area, whichever is less, is required to provide open space as specified in this section. Does not apply to sites half acre or smaller. And then when you start going across the zoning strike, total on-site open space, you go across, the districts are at the top. So if you were looking across and you go to NC, it is 10%. When you go down for the public space, it gives you a percentage. Commercial development, 50%. IMU is 50, and you just look across mixed use development, it is going to give you 25%. Campus development in IC1, IC2, or OF is 25%. And again, you just use that chart to determine what your requirements are. Open space requirements again. The UDO will offer increased flexibility in the location and design of required open space. Examples include all three types of open space may be located on decks, galleries, porches, terrace, patios, or rooftops. Required private open space for multifamily and townhouse dwellings may be located on balconies, porches, or decks. And again, table 16.1 is giving you the design of open space. When you look at it, it's some of the stuff chart. Again, if you go down, like open space shall not abut a loading or service area, and it's telling you that public, common, and private cannot. And so when you just look around, it's telling you when you go, obviously, like mentioned before, if it's gray, that means it's not in that district where the check marks is. That's the use you can do for those type of the public, common, and private open space. Again, hitting you up, giving you the information, visit the UDO website. You can register for UDO sessions. There's a link to email questions. There are supporting documents that you will need to review when designing for the design professionals that you'll want to be familiar with to design your site. And then there's also supporting documentation in the process of being updated and incorporated into UDO requirements. Also, one statement, I know some of you know, one of the text amendments has been filed. So as I tell some people, some of the things when we did this presentation, we did it on what was kind of currently adopted. There are changes going through, And if you visit our website, you can take a link to see those changes. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I think there's 600 pages in that. I have not had a chance to go through all 600 pages. So if you're telling me has something changed, it's possible. I will obviously, I know my team and staff are starting to look through those changes to read that language to see how it's going to be going forth for, when that public hearing is held on that. Right now, we will start going to the questions.
Thank you, Solomon. What I can ask is if you guys could ensure that Alan Goodwin is a co-host. I know he's been kind of helping us fill some chat questions, but I'm still going to read the question and the answer so that it is on the record. But that Alan may be able to assist. So I'll start with the first question, and it came from Elise. It says, good afternoon. Could you please provide an example of micro production of alcohol that isn't a brewery as referenced on the tier 3 parking requirement slide? I do know that Alan did give a answer to that, and I'm just going to read it out again for the record. It says, from the use definitions in Article 15, micro production of alcohol, a facility for the production and packaging of alcoholic beverages such as beer, wine, spirits, cider, and mead for distribution and consumption on premises. A tasting room is an area within the premises of the brewery. Production facilities where guests may sample the brewery's products. When the production facility exceeds the maximum square footage allowed by any prescribed conditions, the facility is not considered micro production of alcohol, but rather an industrial use. The next question comes from Walter. It says, so the 50,000 square foot threshold for a shopping center with a single standard is now gone. Asking that question. I don't know.
Let me look. I believe it is, Walter. I believe it's gone. I believe we've based on the use. I don't see it in there. So like I said, unless they've made that update in the text amendment, that is correct. We have not.
I'm sorry, I probably should also ask for Kevin May to be made a co-host as well. Unfortunately, Walter, we have kind of committed to not unmuting folks. So if you do have I see your hand up. If you do have an additional question, if you don't mind dropping it in the chat, just kind of helps us fill in, especially for a time purposes. I do see that though. Carla asks, and Walter, we're not going to just gloss over your question. If there's any follow-up, please, any subject matter expert in the space, I'll answer that. Carla asks, what page are the exemptions on in Article 19? And I do know that Alan did respond to that with the uses in Tier 3 have a minimum parking requirement and are in the table 19-1.
Yeah, Carla, I probably misunderstood your question, if I can jump in. If the question was, which spaces are exempt from parking maximums? That's in section 19.2, letter F, which begins on page 19-2.
Okay. Thank you, Alan. Walter, the next question comes from Walter as well. Do the tiers in this section relate to the tiers in other sections? And this was at around 108. So I'm Solomon believing that's near the beginning of your presentation. So.
No, I don't believe, I believe the tiers are for parking. I believe the tiers are different.
Okay. Elise asks, please confirm, does the table 19-2 require that at the 26-50 space level, 20% of the space must be EV capable and one space must be EVSE installed, or are there other options to choose between? I do know that Alan responded to that question with 20% of the parking spaces provided must be EV capable plus at least one EVSE installed space must be provided. I think next was Carla. think, what does that bike box protect the rider from the elements, which is what I heard Solomon say?
So typically, Carla, I think the intent was it protects the bike from the elements to keep it dry. It won't necessarily, when we say it's covered, I guess we gotta be like, it necessarily wouldn't mean that the rider, when someone decides a bike like that the rider himself would be protected from the elements. And I think I did say rider, but it's really more meant, the intent is to keep the bicycle. So again, that's if you use a locker. Now, we've had people use like awnings, covering, they've made kind of, it's kind of like they've put the 4 posts in the roof covering it. So it just depends upon how the designer does it.
Thank you for that. Carolyn asks, with required EV space, EV capable EVSE be individual or separate from required ADA handicap spaces? As seen recently, handicap spaces being either or for EV charging parking.
So typically for us, it would be the EV space, because ADA space is the number requirement, is handled by building code. But typically for us, it would be, because we count, when you have your ADA space, we've used it as counting it as part towards your a required space. So I guess to say for us, it would, I guess to say in theory, it would meet both if someone had that requirement and you made one of those spaces. And obviously you would try, you may want to put 2, because again, it would be hard if someone had an EV vehicle and they're not handy, I'm sorry, let me use the right term, ADA accessible, they wouldn't be able to go in there.
Carla asks, and I do see the word tree, so I'm not sure Tim is here. I'll go ahead and ask it. I just don't want not to be able to answer the question, but why the reference to the LDMS when the LDSM refers you back to the unwritten tree manual? I'm not sure if that's something Solomon or anyone else can answer, or if we need to type in our tree folks to get an answer for Carla.
Yeah, we'll have to follow up with our tree, because yes.
Okay. And Carla, also, thank you for the suggestion. She adds in a suggestion asking for subsequent presentations to require presenters to list the article and section in their speech, because of and it is very hefty. I know it's a lot of information, but it's sometimes, I guess, hard without that reference. So thank you, Carla, for that suggestion. We will definitely consider that and take heed. Eddie asks, what is the minimum width of a parking structure landscape area?
It would have to be the minimum at least would be 5 feet, Eddie, at least minimum. And then it would be larger based on if you're planting trees or things like that, but the minimum would be 5 feet.
Okay. Carla asks, what page or table shows me the class ABC requirement? Might take a second. In addition, I will just go ahead and fill this question in as well. She's asking, Carla, asking where the open space table is. It is not, or referencing it not being in the adopted UDO.
Yeah, Solomon, I can help with that.
Okay.
The table that shows whether your landscape yard is required to be an A, B, or C, at least in the current adopted UDO, is on page 20-11. It's table 20-3. I think that's what the question was in regard to. And regarding the open space table, it is typically not in Article 20. It's going to be in the individual zoning district articles, because it will differ according to the zoning district. It is usually expressed as a table, although in the neighborhood 2 district, which is in Article 5, it's expressed as text because it's a little complex. So a little too complex for a table. It's in section 5.4 open space requirements. that's for the neighborhood 2 zoning districts, but I'm looking at other zoning districts like the NC or the IMU, and typically the open space is expressed as a table. It's typically toward the end of the zoning articles, the individual zoning articles. For example, in the NC district, it's under section 10.4 open space requirements, you'll see a table.
Thank you, Alan. The next question comes from Walter. Why can't open space adjoin a frontage? I don't know if anyone can answer that, or if that will require it's coming back with an answer.
I don't know that it can't join a frontage. I think we're going to have to do a little research, but I can certainly think of cases where an open space could be adjoining frontage, at least a public open space. Obviously could be adjoining a frontage, things like outdoor dining area or something in the back of the sidewalk. So I'm not sure where that is coming from.
Sorry. Laura asks, are there specific dimensions required for EV parking spaces or ADA EV parking spaces? Are access aisles required?
There is some of that's in building code, and then some of that is also in our detail for standard parking size in the Charlotte Land Development Standards under the parking detail.
Carla is asking, is an amenitized tree area optional or required? And I just got an answer. Thank you, Henry. Direct message. Amenitized tree save is outlined in 20.15 green area. I don't know if that answers the question. I hope so. Carla, please let us know if that did not answer your question. The next question comes from Lisa. It says, in parking tiers that have a minimum parking requirement for uses within 400 feet of an N1 place type is a 400 feet distance measured from the N1 boundary line, which can fall in the middle of a street or the closest N1 property line. And this is from Lisa. And I do know some of these questions might be a little more complex and take just a little more thinking for us to respond to.
I think we will have to follow up with you on that, Lisa, because I know currently in today's ordinance, we are saying it is from the actual structure to the structure in the district that has that separation requirement.
Okay.
And we kind of do it along the street frontages, not as the crow flies.
Walter, and maybe this is a follow-up from the previous, thank you for typing it in the chat. If every time a tenant changes, a shopping center needs to pre-compute the parking, how would one ever know how many spaces to build initially?
Walter, I guess that's a question we've always been asking. I guess that's where we tell people those designers would have to build for the worst case scenario. Because that's an issue we still have today. So that's not new with the UDO. That's when the shopping center, because we have it now, if someone says, I'm building a strip center and it's all office, and then I convert it all to a restaurant and it has a larger parking requirement, that's an issue that runs. So we sometimes do ask the owner, the manager of the shopping center to maintain those numbers.
Okay, thank you for that. Laura asked, can you confirm that there are no longer landscape screening requirements for dumpsters?
When you say landscape, there are screening requirements for dumpsters. I guess if Laura can provide clarification of what she means landscape.
Okay. Eddie asks, did I hear correctly that tree save areas do not count towards open space? Not listed in 16.5, A.2? Thought tree save could be amenitized.
Let me follow up with that one, Eddie.
Walter's suggesting or asking, check the chart, I believe, that Solomon presented regarding open space. Do you know what slide that was that you might have presented that on? And I think maybe Carla might be asking that same question down below. She does reference that she realizes that where it is in the UDO, but was asking if it's optional or required. No, the follow-up, and it looks like Henry did send a message that says, I'll follow up. Amenitized tree area is one of the green area options that is available for tier 1 or tier 2 place types as defined in 20.15. Sorry if I'm confusing things, but it did look like there was an ask of a chart that you presented, Solomon, during the presentation regarding open space to be put back on the screen.
One second.
And if let's see,
Was this the charts in reference to?
so Walter says the chart where the open space frontage restriction is mentioned. I'm thinking that he and Carla may be asking for the same slide. Yes, he said, thanks, that was it. So where you were.
This one here?
I'm sorry, I don't have a view of
Or
cameras.
did you want the table 16-1?
I think maybe just leave that on the screen and we'll watch to see if that changes. That is what you're asking for. Carla's asking for the previous slide. So maybe one back. Where is that table with this table? She's asking, I guess, where is this within the UDO? And I don't know if that is in reference to, Alan, what you were speaking about, as it's not in essentially a table format.
Yeah, Yolanda, this table on the screen now is not in the UDO. It's a table we created for the slide, accumulating all of the information from the various districts and putting it in the table just for the purpose of sharing it this way.
Thank you. I think maybe that's what she was asking.
And if I can jump back in, I've got some something I can add to that, where we measure that 400-foot distance for parking. May be able to shed some light on that if we get a chance.
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
It's in the Article 2 in the definitions of separation, and I'll read it. When principal uses are required to be measured a certain distance from another use or district, the distance measured in a straight line from the nearest point of the lot line on which such principal use is proposed to be located to the nearest point on the lot line where the other use or district is located, unless otherwise specifically required to be measured differently by this ordinance. So it's basically measuring from the lot line of whatever the development is that's triggering the requirement to the lot line, I would guess, of the nearest property in the neighborhood 1 zoning district in a straight line. I know that's probably hard, but it is in Article 2 under general definitions, and it's the definition of separation.
Thank you, Alan, for that. I see that Laura has, and I don't know if this is a question, Laura, but plant material for screening. I'm not sure if you're asking something in reference to that or if it's just reference to a previous question. So please let us know if there's more to that. Then Elise asks, from the design option 2 in the parking lot perimeter landscape slide, when 30% of the length of the pedestrian wall may be designed as a seat wall, what does the UDO design criteria for what determines a seat wall? Maybe what is? If yes, what are they? I'm sorry, I probably totally butchered that question, but not sure if Alan, Solomon, you guys can answer.
Okay, well, let me get.
And when I'm being told, I'm sorry, Laura's response was for clarity from a previous question.
I mean, we will have to follow up with that one because I believe right now it just gives you the drawing of what the seat wall looks like.
Solomon, let me jump in on that. It's in section 20.5, letter B, design of screening areas, and it's under number 3B. And I'll read it. It says, as an alternate to the shrub plantings in item A above, a low pedestrian wall of 4 feet in height, constructed of masonry, concrete, or similar, may be installed. Then underneath that, in Roman letter II, up to 30% of the total length may be designed as a seating wall. Where seating areas are included, the minimum wall height does not apply. So that's as much as the UDO says about the design of that seating wall. It just gives some basic dimensional requirements, plus the illustration that's below that. But other than that, it doesn't specify how high or how, anything about the dimension of the actual seat.
Okay. Thank you, Alan. It looks like we are at the end of our questions in the chat. Please feel free if you have additional questions to drop those in. I am going to ask that Kate drop in. There is an email inbox that we've been sharing throughout all of these sessions that are found. You can also find that information on the UDO website. Kate has dropped that in, that if you have follow-up questions, something pops into your head after this presentation that you'd like answered, please email this CLT questions@charlottenc.gov. It's monitored Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Something tells me some of these folks monitor after 5 o'clock, maybe when they shouldn't be working. I'm pretty sure that you can email, whenever the question pops into your head, and then the subject matter expert will get the question and get an answer back to you. Please feel free to use that as a way to ask questions for clarification and share information that you see within the UDO. Man, I'll kick it back over to you to wrap up if you like.
Okay.
It looks like that's all of the questions.
Oh, sure.
I think that's all the questions we had if you want to wrap up.
Thank you. We know this was an awful lot of information today, so we appreciate your patience and we appreciate the questions. It helps educate us also. Like Yolanda did say, and I apologize, I should announce Yolanda Jones as our moderator on the question. She does an excellent job of this. She's with the Planning Communication Department. So thank you, Yolanda and Kate. But please feel free to use that mailbox to send us questions. We are monitoring that and hopefully getting some answers out in a timely manner. We hope you enjoyed this session. Again, it'll be the recording will be posted within a few days on the website. Just a reminder that next week is session 9. And it's going to be required new street improvements and standards. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for that. Again, we thank you for your time and your energy and helping us all understand this new world we're living in called the UDO. Thanks again, everyone. Appreciate it. Have a great day and a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks.